The world is waking up, and you finding your way here today is no coincidence. The spirit world always has a way of guiding us where we most need to be at the absolute perfect time. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock, and you're listening to the Guided Podcast, where we explore how the spirit world works on our behalf to guide us along our paths. This is where you'll learn how to live a life that is both conscious and connected, so you can supercharge your pathway to healing and open to life's magic and miracles. Come along this journey to see how guided you truly are. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Guided. I know we've been on hiatus the last 2 weeks, and I am just so excited to be able to swing back to you all with this week's guest. So this week, we are speaking with Maria DiLorenzo, and Maria is the founder and CEO of MFD Style, which is a personal styling and wardrobe consulting business. So for the last 15 years, she has educated and guided those who seek to make a stronger connection between their self-presentation and self-love. Maria fervently believes how we dress says something deeper about how we feel about our own value and self-worth. With her intuitive styling approach, she has helped hundreds transform into the best version of themselves by leveraging wardrobe to reflect their authenticity. Maria's expertise is in reimagining wardrobes to help people maximize what they already own by creating new combinations and alternative functions for those items. She speaks about the intersection of psychology, spirituality, and style in her podcast, Above and Beyond Style. She holds a BA in psychology from Loyola University, New Orleans, and an MA in pastoral ministry from Boston College. While Maria is currently based in Boston, Massachusetts, she is on an exciting relocation journey to infuse more vibrancy into her life. So Maria, thank you so much for being here today. I am so excited for my listeners to hear your amazing awakening story and all of the things. And so to start us off, you can just dive into your awakening story and just tell us, like, how did you come into your own spiritual understanding and awareness, and how has your journey brought you to where you are right here, right now?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is like pure joy and just pleasure to be with you. So very happy to share a bit of who I am and what I'm about and how I can connect with your community in this way. So thank you. My awakening story, I feel like, is a bit, untraditional. I feel like everybody may say that about their own because no two lives are the same. But I don't know that I can pinpoint like one grand gesture that was sort of like, I'm now in connection with spirit, or I have this connection. It was actually something very much present in my life from a very young age and evolved as we would do in our lifetimes to it. And so I think it's important to maybe know a little bit about like my childhood and sort of where I grew up and kind of the dynamics around that. So I am originally from Dallas, Texas, actually from Irving, which is the town between Dallas and Fort Worth. And if you know Texas as the Bible Belt. This is the place where a lot of Protestant Christianity is just very much like a prominent part of the world, of their lifestyle, of kind of what's happening. And it's even very much connected to like the social comings and goings. And so I had a group of friends from a very young age, from like kindergarten, first grade, all the way through high school, that I'm actually still pretty connected with, that where faith and spirituality and religion were very much a part of their ethos and in their homes. And that was very much the case in my family as well, except we were Catholic. And so there was this interesting dynamic of religion and sort of how we were Catholic in this context of Protestantism. And I can remember as a young child feeling a little like different about that, but not really having a great like conceptual understanding of sort of where they differ and where some of those differences came to play. But I can very honestly say that like my childhood had a very rich sense of spirituality and religion from a very young age. And it very much had to do with my parents too. They were practicing Catholics. And, of course we went to church and we did all the things, but I think it's important to also understand a little bit about my dad, who will be kind of an important player in this story. So my dad was an English professor, and he studied exclusively in medieval literature. So it was like Dante and Chaucer and St. Augustine and some kind of like the major were philosophical religious thinkers in medieval times. Now, growing up, this was like, you don't know how you know anything different from what your parents do. You're like, yeah, that's just what my dad does. And you don't know if it's normal or abnormal. But like the coffee table books in my house were very much like high level, very esoteric, like really sophisticated books and like thoughts around philosophy, religion, and literature. And so this environment, now I understand, was very unique and very much helped me with like an academic appreciation for spirituality and religion and kind of the great thinkers of the world. And I'm very grateful to my parents for that type of environment, because I really think I came to an appreciation for like the academic study of it and really having more of a profound understanding of how it could sort of transform your moral behavior and ethics and some of those like things. Again, as you're growing up, like those are really important transformative concepts that I feel like I was exposed to really young, and I came to learn that wasn't normal for everybody. So, go ahead.
As you talk about medieval times, I'm thinking about my own third grade medieval banquet where we learned about, the knights and the pages, and we got to pick what we were going to be. And I'm pretty sure I wore a flower crown when I went to school on that day. So anyway, as you're talking about this is totally what I'm flashing to. I love it.
And it is kind of funny when you think about the medieval era, right? There was a lot of imagination and adventure and deep kind of wrestling, in like soul wrestling concepts, right? And so it's like rich with images and all these different things that, again, like I didn't really know that was abnormal to like have in your house when you were growing up. So perhaps to no surprise, then when I went to college, I was interested in some of these things. And I went on to study psychology and religious studies and really loved it because I was curious about humans and like what makes them tick and behavioral patterns and things that like make people like their motivations and all of the things that really drive them to be who they are. And so again, this like concept of academic study was really something that I took on myself. It was not on any level forced upon me or pressed upon me. But as I got older and more mature, and I did go to Catholic universities, I felt this real connection with my Catholicism and trying to understand sort of where I fit in this space of this particular religion, this faith tradition, and the practice of spirituality. And I think in college, it was very much, I went to Loyola University in New Orleans, which is a Jesuit Catholic institution. And there is something really beautiful about Ignatian spirituality. If any of your listeners are familiar about Ignatius, there is a real a connection between who you are and what you offer the world, and to be in sync with God in that regard, about really coming to understand like your deepest talents, skills, gifts, and trying to really leverage them, not just for your own benefit, but for the benefit of your neighbor. And I think that constituted a lot of my behavioral choices at very fundamental ages, which again, I'm really lucky because I don't know that everybody got that. And I was receptive to it. I mean, I went to college in New Orleans. You would think I would have been like a party animal and like done all this like crazy ass shit, but I didn't. I actually was like really loved the lifestyle of New Orleans, but didn't kind of go down that path, if you will. And so this like academic study of religion and spirituality, and like I was maturing in my Catholic faith, so much so that when I finished undergrad, I wanted to continue on and I went to graduate school specifically to study pastoral ministry, which at the time I was 22 years old. I'm going into graduate school, and I don't really know that I had a clear understanding of like where that would take me, even like in a career, et cetera. But I had enough curiosity around these great thinkers, around spiritual thinkers, about really the human experience and like what it is to be human and to feel all the things, that sort of like spectrum of emotion and how that impacts our lives. And what is God about us in all of that? Like, how is the relationship very much a part of how we're experiencing this humanity? And so I was in grad school. I came to Boston College And it was a huge jump for me to move from the South to the Northeast. And I was very much surrounded by great philosophical thinkers and teachers and academics, not only just through my professors and teachers, but even just in the classroom. I was by far one of the youngest people in my program. I mean, the majority of people were well into their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so it was a really interesting dynamic of being a young person studying this concept of pastoral ministry, which was really this balance between theology and counseling, and really coming to understand how to be present for people through any variety of human experiences. And so what naturally then led me to my work, if you will, and I got into college campus ministry. This was my first internship. It was something that kind of piqued my curiosity because I was not too far off from the college-aged student. I was just a few years older than them by the time I had finished my graduate work. And there was something, I'm sure you can resonate with this, Lindsay, about like the college years. There's so much happening in the midst of the traditional college age student from 18 to 22. And I really felt a connection with that, about the push-pull, the testing boundaries, the heartache, the joy, the successes, the independence. There was just so much happening in those 4 years that I really felt this attraction to accompanying college students in the midst of this. And so campus ministry was this perfect place for me to begin this kind of accompaniment. And it was a place where I could put into practice some of this academic thought, concepts, et cetera, around religion and spirituality, but like on the day to day. And that was, again, very much of the Ignatian spirituality that's like in the world of the world. It's not in this other place. It's here and now with where we're living and all the nitty gritty, icky stuff that we have to manage and deal with. And that college campus ministry role, and I had several roles in and out of like what you would call formal ministry that were pretty transformative for me. And I think I'd like to believe that I was present and good to other people and I brought them a certain value, but I do think the value that was given for me in those years was really about seeing there was a different side of this concept about spirituality that was more than the academic, and it really tapped into the heart space. And it could really transform who you are and how you lived your life and the decisions you made. So it was more than just like that ethical, moral, behavioral patterns that, of course, I was curious about. It was like that inner life that I just don't think I ever really got until I had a really powerful kind of pivotal moment in my life. And I think this is common for people where there's sort of a tipping point, transformative thing. I don't know. And maybe if this is like the place where we put a dot or something, we can say this is maybe where it happened. But I mentioned about my dad, and I had a really lovely relationship with my dad, both my parents, to be really candid. I'm lucky that way. And my dad was this funny combination of humor, intellect, a little bit of like vulgarity. Like he was kind of on the edge of being a little like, on that. And he brought such an interesting combination of his intellect and his he was so smart, but he was so human. He was a professor, so he spent his life in front of college students and trying to translate these very high level ideas and thoughts to college freshmen, right? And so there was a relatability I think I had with my dad, and he had tremendous compassion, I think, for the human experience. And so I was lucky that I had someone like that. And I'm speaking about him in past tense because, as you perhaps could garner, he did die. He had an extensive circumstance around cancer that we gratefully was not a long process, for him, but it was impactful for all of us in our family. And he died in 2010. And that very summer, I can remember feeling I was confronted with a pretty important decision. And this is maybe where I'm going to start to tell you a little bit about where style enters the picture, because I haven't really talked about style. And I want you to know that it's been alongside me throughout this whole experience, but it hadn't become maybe the focal point of my life until this point. So my father had died the summer of 2010, and I can remember going to my closet and standing in front of my closet, packing for his memorial service. he was going to be cremated. So we weren't going to have a traditional kind of wake and burial and all of these things. So it was going to be a memorial mass at the church that I grew up in. And the timing of this is a little quirky because I had gotten a phone call the day he died. I got a phone call from my sister. And at the time I had been working at Nordstrom. So this was alongside some of my style work. And I remember I was sitting in the break room at Nordstrom and my sister had called and she'd said, Maria, I think it's time for you to come. Like, I think you need to come to Texas and it feels like it's imminent, right? So I booked a flight for that very next morning. I think I was leaving at like 6 a.m. It was super early. And so I got home that evening and I was packing. Now, he hadn't yet died. I was anticipating what was about to happen. So I remember standing in front of my closet and feeling this, like, I'm going to have to pack for this thing, this event, this place where I'm going to have to show up in front of all of these people and I'm going to be talking and connecting about my dad. And I was feeling very conflicted, of course, about his death and deeply sad about it. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I guess I should just pack a black dress. And then I had this like visceral reaction to that about like, nope, I cannot wear black. And I really couldn't understand that until later, because what I was tapping into was this feeling of like black to me in that moment felt very much about closing off, shutting down, going in your deep, dark circle, like no connection, grief, loneliness, like just all of this like really painful kind of vibe. And I thought, I don't really want to show up to my father's memorial service feeling that way or projecting any kind of energy of that vibe, because I wanted to show up not just because of who he was, but in a way to celebrate and honor him. And I really felt like I'm going to have to choose to wear something else. And so I go through my closet and I find this dress. It's so funny. It's like not even all that special, but I remember it, of course, to the T, and I still have it. It was a silk wrap dress from Banana Republic. And the base color of it was like a creamy tan. And it had this geometric pattern on it that was kind of gray. And on the bottom collar or the hem of the dress, it was this beautiful lavender purple. It's funny because purple's not really my favorite color. It's just funny that I would select this, but there was something about the color palette, the fabric choice, the way it sort of sat on my body, that this like softness and this, not just in the color palette, but this fabric just felt really soothing. Now, mind you, it was the middle of summer in Texas, so it was blazing hot and I didn't want to be hot or overheated. I overheat very easily. I'm a redhead. I'm sensitive to the heat. I don't love any of that. So I was very much trying to channel this, like, I have to wear something that is going to help me feel soft, comforted, protected, and in some ways like strong, because when you go to these kind of events, you have to show up and talk with people about this person that is like your everything, right? And to be able to do that like over and over and over again to people, of course, super close to me, but then also people that I had never known or really knew that just knew my dad. And so this like having to show up and be a version of myself that could do this really hard thing felt like, yeah, all I can do is lean into this like garment choice, which would come to be like a primary principle of the work that I am doing now. So I'm going to pause there because I feel like that was a very long little journey, but it felt important to kind of take you through that and where I've been.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that, because I know that's a hard story to share. And I so appreciate the authenticity with which you're able to really connect us into that moment that you had when you were going through this really hard thing, which is losing a parent, which I'm sure there are so many people that can really connect in with that. And the intentionality with which you were moving through that period of your life feels very important, because not only were you looking at how do I really honor my dad and show up for him and celebrate him in a way that feels really good to me, but how do you show up and support yourself in honoring him, right? In the way that feels good to you. And I do think that oftentimes we're really good at showing up for others and supporting other people, but we don't take the time to really think about what we need in a moment to show up for ourselves. And you were the person who opened my eyes to how fashion doesn't have to be this thing that's vain, right? Or about appearances, or that we can really use fashion to support how we feel on the inside. And, for our listeners, people wouldn't know that Maria and I, worked together in higher education. Maria was one of my very first supervisors way back in the day, at my very first real human job, in higher education. But it was interesting because that was a period of my life where I was in the depth of an eating disorder. And I was actually using clothing to hide and to make myself feel invisible. And so what strikes me about, you telling your story is just all of the different ways that we are psychologically and emotionally moving through things, and all of the different resourcing that's available to us. And I don't think our clothing is one that comes to too many people's minds.
I would agree. I think there's a common perception that fashion or wardrobe is basically a shallow industry. It's a consumer culture. It's capitalistic, and it very well is all of those things on some level. But there is a personalization to wardrobe that I don't know that everybody really connects or goes to, because it's one of the things that, at least for us in the United States, we get dressed every day. We're putting clothes on our body and making a choice about that every day. And it is enabling us on some very deep subconscious level to do the things that we have to do for our day. And I think that was a very key insight that I was tapping into now 13 years ago, to understand that wardrobe has this ability to be one of those tools to support us, to enable us, to allow us to be a bit more courageous, or to tap into some of that inner energy and strength that sometimes it's difficult to conjure up in the midst of all the things that we're having to do in a day. And I think when I was able to make that connection for myself, it was easier for me then to say, wow, I actually think I might be able to help people make that connection for themselves too. And it didn't always have to be within the context of grief or loss. That was just the place where it originated for me. But a lot of people can tap into that energy, whether it is actual loss, or if it's just struggle or some kind of angst or shame, or, there's all sorts of different lower level vibration emotions that really take us out of integrity with who we are. And clothing has this really powerful way of creating authenticity and identity for us that a lot of people, I think, underestimate and sort of disregard or kind of put it as a lower priority. And so then it doesn't feel as, again, it goes back to that, it's so shallow. It's just the thing you got to do. And so there's, in some ways, I feel like a missed opportunity that they're not leveraging here with this choice that they're making every day.
Yeah, because so much of how we move through our day, right? And what shows up and what we're attracting, it's all based on our frequency and how we feel on the inside. And I wonder, and I'm curious about your insight on this, how many people that you're working with from a client perspective are honestly attracting, more things to feel shameful about, or more things to feel, fill in the blank. I know for me, it was shame. That's why I go to shame, because, I would get dressed and it would be this inner dialogue of pure self-hatred and disgust about what my physical appearance was. And so anything, and not to mention for me in the plus size industry at that time, it was there wasn't anything, I think the plus size industry has come a long way. And I think there are, many choices that can enable people with a bigger body to feel good in their own skin. But at the time, there wasn't for me. And so anything that I could find that would just hide, that would allow me to hide, allow me to feel smaller, to feel invisible. And we joke about it when we work together because I wore a lot of ponchos and this has become like a running joke. Ponchos are very fashionable, for the record. I still love a good poncho, but it was why I was wearing them. And it was because I wanted to hide my body. And I felt like the lack of structure with the poncho, how long it was. I'm very tall, so I could kind of pull it off in a way that actually looked a little bit more fashionable. But the reason I was wearing it was really to hide. And so, when I think about how we use clothes, even when we're getting dressed in the morning, is this a way that we're just at war with ourselves? One other way that we're not in harmony with who we really are? Or, is it something that's like, no, like these jeans just do not flatter my beautiful body, right? Like, and that's, I think, what I notice about the work that you do is really helping people to connect with who they really are and like leverage that, not all of these things that we pick apart about ourselves.
Yeah, it's such an important piece of this. There's so many different ways I could go down this path, but I think one of the things that you're really tapping into is around, again, that self-narrative and that self-talk. And I would say a lot of my clients come to me with different levels of where that self-talk lives. It can be very subtle. It can be quite loud. It can be it can be very demonstrative in other ways. So it's really interesting to sort of notice how people talk about themselves, particularly when they're getting dressed. And having that sense of when I'm looking in the mirror and what is this about? What am I saying to myself? How do I feel? And this is really where the psychology of all of this goes hand in hand, right? You're hearing the beliefs, the narrative, the truths that we're telling ourselves about who we are, and particularly around our physical bodies, which of course clothing is a direct correlation with that. And a lot of my work, I feel like, is helping people to hear what they're saying and to understand how it is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy when you continue down this road of, I look so terrible. I hate this about my body. Oh, my knees are too clunky. My ankles are too big. My shoulders are like the things that people just pick apart in their bodies and themselves has this. It's of no surprise to any of us. It wears you down. It gets you down to a point where some women I've worked with couldn't even look at themselves in a full-length mirror. Like they were so in this space of shame and angst and sadness and disappointment that there was nothing that could take them out of it in that moment, right? And listen, I'm not a fairy godmother. I do not wave a magic wand and all things get better with great clothes, right? I'm not trying to minimize or simplify this so much that there is some real space for mental health and behavioral health and the things that we have to do to really help understand what is this narrative that we're saying to ourselves and why are we believing it? Why are we buying into the thoughts that are in our head? And we'll certainly get into that, I'm sure. And how that then impacts the choices we make about how we get dressed. And I think one thing for me, as I am trying to work with clients of all shapes and sizes, men and women, those of, different gender identities, right? There's a lot of fluidity in all of this today. The biggest takeaway that I can teach anyone is that it's not you. It's the clothes. The clothes are just not right for you. There's nothing inherently wrong with you, your body, your shape, your size, your any of that. It's that particular piece of clothing doesn't work for you. And I assure you, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. I assure you, there are other clothes in this world that will work better on your body. So please do not take the belief that because something isn't working for your body or doesn't look good on your body or whatever the story or narrative is that you're telling yourself, it's because something's wrong with you. And I think that to me is the starting point in a lot of these conversations around, like you said, Linz, like people hide in their clothes. They're looking for it to be a cloak, to be an armor. Like there's all sorts of different, psychology around why people make the choices they make around the clothes that they wear. But it's not you guys. It's the clothes. And I can go on a whole other tangent about sizing and manufacturing and how garments are made and how and why that gets so very complex and really can create so much frustration and angst and disappointment for consumers around purchasing clothes because you can't find something that works. And this is a very complex problem and one reason why I have some job security, because I will likely always be able to help people in and around that problem.
Yeah. And you know what was so interesting? So I went through this process with Maria myself, and I was definitely someone, admittedly, even though Maria is a friend, I was like, well, I love what she does, but I don't need this, right? I don't care that much about clothing or, whatever. But, the universe kind of forced my hand because I needed help editing my wardrobe down before I made my cross-country move. And Maria graciously showed up to help me, get my act together. And it was amazing because she was slipping in her magic as she was working through my closet with me. And what was fascinating was, like, at the end, I was like, wow, not only was this super helpful, but she totally transformed my idea of how I was even looking at the clothing in my own closet and what that said about me and the message I wanted to send to people about who I am based on how I show up. And it never, for so long, it was like, it's just clothes. Like, do I really care what I look like? But from a place of self-love, how do I want to show up and really project that for myself, that I feel good in my own skin, in my own clothes? And it wasn't about what other people were going to think. It was about, how do I want to feel in my heart, in my clothes, and how do I want to show up to other people? And what makes me feel comfortable and confident to show up as my most authentic self. And so it was interesting because as I made my own transition from corporate to now entrepreneurship, I used to be in suits and very tailored things. And Maria was like going through my closet, and it's just like all of this corporate stuff that I have absolutely no use for anymore. And it was like, well, we can just wipe all of that out right now and give that to Dress for Success, right? Or like some organization that does, some really good work there. And then we were left with like, oh my gosh, there's really not a whole lot left. But Maria was able to identify in my closet, like, some of the themes that she could see me gravitating towards, whether it was like different, like floral patterns, or, we landed on this like structured flow for me. But it was so helpful because she gave me this like bullet list of what I feel good in, what I really like, what I feel like I want my clothing image or identity. You'll put your own words to it, but what I wanted it to be. And it's really been helpful because now as I go shopping, I'm not just like buying things anymore. I'm really keeping in mind what you've told me about what my style is. And if they don't hit this criteria, it's so much easier for me to just walk away and be like, no, that's not quite right. Like, I'm going to move on to this next thing. And then it also feels really good when I find a piece and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to actually wear this.
Yeah, this is so good because for multiple reasons, because clothing really can be a communication tool. And I don't know that a lot of people think of it that way, but it can say something about who we are and what is important to us and how we feel about ourselves. And for anybody that, in that, what is it, the 7 seconds impression before you've even done anything, you're making some kind of impression to people, your physical apparel attributes, they're communicating something about you. Now, my point is, make sure that message, make sure your clothes mean what you want them to say about you. So if there is a disconnect there between what you really want to say about who you are, how you want to show up, it's going to show if there's a disconnect. And I think and we're going to get into this, but this is where I think Spirit has really just like the floodgates opened up and was like, come on in, Maria, we're ready for you to do this work. I really feel like this is the place where I channel support because I really have the ability to look at people and who they are and what they're about and what they're trying to be about and what's important to them and what's their lifestyle. How do they want to go about their day? What are who are the people that are important to them? Like, learning some of these core components of someone's experience helps me then say, let me see what that looks like in a wardrobe form. And I feel like the reflection back, as you really just named, is really where anybody can decide for themselves if this is accurate or inaccurate. So if I'm able to go into a closet and say, here's what I'm noticing. Here are some themes. Here's some preferences I see. This is kind of where I see you gravitating toward. Does that feel like you? And sometimes you get people that are like, yeah, that does feel like me. Great. And so we're able to really leverage that on a much deeper level. Sometimes I get people that are like, no, that doesn't feel anything like me. And I don't even know I have this in my wardrobe. And so these are the moments where I do feel like I get to channel that intuitive guidance about who are these people and how do they want to show up in the world? And do the clothes match that? And so I am particularly good, not to toot my own horn here, but I feel like I'm good at finding the pieces or helping identify pieces for people that are like, this is you. Do you see why? And to help them get more critical in their own shopping and their own ability to select clothing that is like, yeah, that is my structured flow. That is the thing that really and you can see them start to discover it for themselves and makes shopping more efficient and more fun because you feel more connected to your clothes. So it's a process that takes this like self-discovery that it takes time, like any two people. When you're in relationship with one another, you've got to get to know each other. And so it's not a one-shot wonder. It's not a 30-minute appointment that I can like bang out and know everything, but it's an evolution and it's an ability for you to take ownership over that belief that I want my clothes to say something about me that is authentic of who I am. And everybody's message is different. So I can't say it's always this, or this is the go-to formula, or there's nothing formulaic about what I do. It very much is individualized and specific to who you are. And my goal is never to make you dress like me. It's to make you dress like you.
And I think one of the misconceptions that I always had about stylists was around like, oh, they're just going to go want to buy all these designer clothing brands. And you don't do that. You really work with mainstream fashion. You work with what's in people's closets. I was really surprised by the whole process because my judgments around what it was really were inaccurate. And I found it so helpful on the flip side. It's funny because since I edited and with you and then moved, I also feel like I'm buying pieces at a much slower pace. And so there is this part of me that still feels like I'm stepping into whatever this look is going to be, but it feels so much better because there's a consciousness that I'm bringing to what I'm purchasing. There's a consciousness that I'm bringing to like how I want to feel in terms of how I want to show up. And I just think that it's the intention, right? There's a different intention with which you work with people, and that intention is translated into how we're showing up with our style.
I appreciate you bringing that up because there are a lot of different ways you can interact with a stylist. And maybe you have a certain idea in your head about what it is to be a stylist and what that means if you're going to hire someone to do that work with you. I'll tell you that I'm kind of in a different niche. I really feel like my work is not about adding to the consumer culture. I very much have a principle in my business plan and my ethos that I want to have a sustainable impact around fashion. And I know I'm just one person and I only connect with so many people in the world, but I try to help people reimagine their wardrobes, to help them see these pieces that perhaps had no potential in your mind, but now have different potential now that we're starting to see and understand things differently about who you are and your own authentic message. So I really try to repurpose things, change the function of different items, wearing them different ways, adding accessories. So I'm always sort of starting from what you have first and then moving toward, well, maybe there's an item or two here or there that creates a shopping gap list. And then we can, again, I love what you said about that, like slowly and intentionally choose what are the right items that fit this need, and to recognize that it can be a process. It can take years sometimes to find the right perfect pair of black jeans. Don't be discouraged by that. Have courage and confidence in knowing that when the right thing comes, the right thing comes. There's never a scarcity of clothing in this industry. So there's always the ability to find the right thing for you. It takes patience. It takes trust. It takes a lot of confidence in who you are, but there's great joy, I think. And when you start to curate this wardrobe that is like really you, I feel like you can like go into your day and rock every every easy and hard thing that happens to you and just be like, gave it my best. And I love being a part of that with people and helping them. Again, it's one tool. It's not the tool, right? There's lots of tools we need in our day to help us move through this life, but it's one tool that everybody has to make a choice about every day that I really hope to leverage and help people with.
Yeah, I think that's so awesome. And as you're talking about all of this, I just find myself coming to this question around, how has this journey with fashion really impacted your own evolution with spirituality and consciousness? And how has that brought you to how you move through each and every day, whether it's with fashion or spirituality, the intersection of the two?
I think it's interesting because so you've heard a little bit of my story and how I've had this interest in psychology, in spirituality, and style. And a couple years ago, I came to this point where I was like, yeah, those are like my pillars. When I really look at my life and where my interests lie and where I really feel like I connect with the things that are not just what I want to learn, but I think what spirit wants me to do in this world, I think those three are kind of it. My style has certainly evolved as I have evolved, right? And I think the really fun thing about my personal style choices is I have to take all the messages I teach to my own heart, right? Like there's nothing that I share with clients or with you that I don't need to do for myself too. So there are days when I look in the mirror and I'm like, I don't love the way that looks, or that's a little tighter than it used to be. And so that doesn't feel good because there is a cultural norm that smaller is better and bigger is worse. And so there's this constant relearning about how style and fashion, how it applies to me, has to then be attributed to my clients or to the people that I'm working with. And so my style aesthetic, I don't think has changed all that dramatically over the years, although I've kind of fine-tuned and finessed it a bit. I would say I'm a very classic or traditional dresser. I lean on the preppier side of style, but I tend to really appreciate things with a little bit of something special. So I would say it's like classic with the flair. So something that has like a really nice little detail or pin tucking or the way the garment lays, or there's just something kind of unique and different, but to kind of a classic or traditional shape that I really enjoy wearing personally. So like my color palette, whatever it may be, I feel like there are ebbs and flows and all of that, but I tend to stay pretty down that lane. And I would also say the other piece of this that is fun, and this is actually something that hasn't really come up yet, that I find clothing to be this place where I can access joy and play better than most things in my life. And so if there's a place where spirit is like, oh, honey, yes, go do that. Go play with clothes, go be in people's closets, go play dress up. Like it's just this, I kind of get lost in this imaginative sweet spot place that I really feel like it's my inner child being like, all right, we get to play with clothes today. And it's just this like wildly fun thing that I recognize is not everybody's jam. But for me, I just feel nothing but pure joy when I do it.
And it's amazing because you just left your corporate job a little over a year ago, probably at this point, right? To now, or has it even been that long? It might not have even been that long.
Oh yeah. Over a year now. Year and a half.
Okay. Year and a half. Okay. So you've left your corporate job a year and a half ago and you're literally living your dream, right? And so, I mean, how many people can say that they literally get paid to play?
Honestly. And it's the wildest thing when you really get quiet about like these choices that we're making for ourselves and the lifestyle and the ways that I have really come to understand how spirit wants me to live, like craves for me to live, that I am finally getting some of that. Like I'm receiving the information in a very different way than before. Cause I think I was resistant to it. I think it didn't feel responsible to me, or it didn't feel like like work needed to be this different construct than I was allowing myself to have. And when I just unlocked that key about like, oh, wait a second, I can do the thing that I actually like really like to do. People will pay me for that. And like, I get to make my schedule and I get to like say yes or no. Like there is freedom in this job that I've never experienced before that has just helped me understand what it's like to live in alignment and to be in flow and to really appreciate like this human experience that I'm living and not this like grind, this struggle, this angsty thing around work that I think I've certainly felt in my life, even though I've had really great jobs. So it's just a very different way of life, which I know you can also echo.
It is a very different life. And it is not without its challenge for sure. Mostly, right. Our inner work, our inner, evolutionary processes. But Maria and I have been on very parallel paths throughout this. So it's been interesting to watch each other and support each other along the journey of spiritual entrepreneurship. But the thing I kind of want to circle back to is, where we started the conversation, you really talk about your Catholic roots, but as you speak, you really just talk about spirit, right? And so, how did your own process evolve, especially, because many people might grow up with a foundation of religion, but you actually pursued extensive education, right? Around pastoral ministry, right? Like you were diving into it. And so I know there are so many listeners that are also straddling these two worlds of the programming of their religious upbringing, coupled with this pull towards universe, source, spirit, right? Like this universal intelligence. And so, how do you straddle that yourself? And what is, the dance that has moved you to where you are now and what you believe now about how to leverage spirituality and source energy?
That's the question, right? It really is. And I think the easiest and the simplest way I can answer that is to say that it is a both and not an either or. And I think a lot of people, particularly if you grew up within the confines, and I use that word intentionally around institutional religion, that there are pieces of that are so part of who I am, that it's like the thread of Maria. And there's no way I could extract that, remove it, cut the cord, ignore, right? It is a part of how my entire spiritual development was developed because I had this relationship with a formal religious practice that was heavy in ritual and that I really love and appreciate. And I think I will always love and appreciate about Catholicism. Now, that is not to say I have not had my struggles within the construct of this particular religious tradition. And I mean no disrespect to anyone who is within this space or is feeling maybe again that push-pull of having to pick either or. It's never an either or for me. That the elements of Catholicism, as I mentioned, shaped so much of who I am. But I think what I learned as I got older, and I don't know if this is just an age thing, experience, life, wisdom, maybe not, I don't know. But I think I just got to understand that God, source, spirit, universe, these are labels for something that is so much bigger than our minds can even comprehend. And I think when I got to a place that I could finally understand that I have deep respect for the Catholic tradition, but it's not everything. And it doesn't speak to this expansiveness that I think I really got to experience partially through my dad's death and also through my own experiences of learning to reconnect with my inner child, reparenting some of the things that my inner child learned when she was very young and didn't really understand what was going on, and helping her come to this better appreciation for this expansive universe that we're in and how we play a role in it. So my spiritual development and how I sort of toggle between these two places is never an abandonment of one or the other. It really is this, like, the way if I had a visual for it, it's like the DNA helix, that it feels like they're so kind of intertwined with each other that I couldn't extract them without changing like the essence of it, right? And so I think I just got to this place, particularly because when my father crossed over, and I don't know if any of your listeners can resonate with this or will have an experience with this, but I just just got such clarity about there is so much more going on here than I ever considered before. And that in his death, where death feels separate, right? Like there's an ending there. There is a tangible absence of this person. And yet I'll just tell you, in the 13 years he has been gone, he has not felt gone. He has felt really close and very much like around and active. And it helps me then connect to this expansiveness that just is beyond faith traditions, religious practice. Again, no disrespect to ritual or the community aspect of formal religion. Like all that is still true and of what I believe. And yet there is something more. And I think I finally got to understand that I don't have to put a label on it. I don't have to belong to one or the other. I can be in this space of having deep appreciation for both. And it gives me great joy, actually, because I have this greater appreciation for like this magical world. I'm a magical child. Just remember that. This magical world that is like beyond me. And when I cross over, I get to like experience whatever that's like. So I am like in this whole other different plane of understanding, however limited my human understanding is, but understanding that, wow, there's so much more going on here than what my formal religious teachings gave me. And that's okay. And I really am so grateful that I've had both.
Yeah. And I think you're highlighting such an important part with how we can approach, honestly, everything in our life, whether it's religion and spirituality or anything. Take what resonates with you and let go of the rest. It's only our judgment of something being desirable or undesirable, effective or ineffective, right? Like that we end up placing ourselves in these boxes, right? You know, where we believe that God is something or someone outside of us, like that disconnects us from that source energy. When we learn that like we are God, God is us, like that we are one in it all, like that is a much different understanding. And that's kind of what I got from what you're describing about this expansiveness. It's like recognizing like that God is you, God is within you. It is not outside of you. We are not separate from it, but all of these different, things on this earth plane do, and the experiences we have are what try to separate us from that core essence.
Yeah. And that's tricky for people, right? And I get that. I really honor that for anybody that might be struggling in that space. And I think when we have this, maybe it's permission that we give ourselves, that permission to think it being something different than we've always known it to be, it allows the information or the revelation, to use a religious term, to come in a way that like you couldn't have known or expected or, anticipated. And so it gives you a whole different appreciation. And I think there has to be an open-heartedness to this approach that I think anybody who is so locked in and rigid around whatever their religious tradition or belief is, this isn't exclusive to Catholicism, that you're losing something about the essence of who this source creator is. And again, this is no criticism of it. It's just knowing that it's more than that. When you think you know what it is and then some. And so I have really come to appreciate that there's aspects of this that like my human brain can't comprehend. And so I'm okay with that. I don't have to label it. I don't have to make it be something where I live in this category or that category. I'm all right with it being beyond me. And in that sort of expansive beyond place, I feel great comfort and there's great trust that is benevolent and it is for me and of me. And it's about helping me get to live this like human life in this, like my spiritual self gets to live this human life for all its ups and downs and crazy shit that happens. And we have an appreciation for it because we've done all those things.
So much. And I love what you're saying about approaching it all with this curiosity and openness and receptivity that maybe these things are different than what our minds have assigned them to be. Someone has told us that they are. And the more we can, and I think this is for all of us, right? It's like the unlearning of everything, not just religion, but everything that we've been taught, everything that we've been told. And I think this is where you and I both connect on our love for college students so much, because it's such a pivotal point in your your life where it may be the first time you're out of the house, away from your caregivers, and able to really look at, wait a minute, what do I believe? Why do I believe this? And is this because I was told this is what I should believe, or this is because I really do fundamentally agree with whatever this statement is? And whether we are talking about religion, whether we are talking about, politics, whether we are talking about anything, what we believe in spiritual realms, right? Like, I think it all is so critical to look at why we believe what we believe. And, in this day and age, I really feel that Spirit is calling us to step into these leadership roles, to live differently, right? Like to live more from this heart-centered place, not from a place of our mind. And when we are like living, I've seen this in my own entrepreneurial journey, right? This inner conflict and this push-pull between, working in the corporate world one way my entire life, and Spirit saying, oh, hey, here's this flashy object over here. Like, you can work less, right? Like all of these different paradigm shifts, which are literally so uncomfortable to feel in my body because the programming is so deep. And as I step more and more into the way they're asking me to live, it's like, oh, wow, this feels so much better. Like, this is wild, right? And yet, like, really needing to, what you said, honor that there is a process of undoing, and really being gentle with ourselves as we get curious that, like, okay, maybe this isn't the way it has to be just because someone has told us that this is the way.
Yeah, you named that so beautifully, because don't let me fool you and thinking this isn't uncomfortable. This is highly uncomfortable space to be in, particularly when you are someone who is intentional and thoughtful about the way that you're living your life, right? Like there's a lot of things I'm not, but one thing I do know that I am is that I'm intentional about my choices and my behaviors. And I think when I really commit to that at the most fundamental level, it does not mean it's easy. It does not mean some of these paradigm shifts, as you said, are not like blowing my mind, because it's not something that I've ever known. It's not something that I was taught. It's not something good or bad. It's just different. And having to really give yourself the grace and the permission to explore that a little bit and kind of nuzzle up to it a little bit and say, well, what are you about? Tell me more. And to get that curiosity to help be your guidepost, I think feels really uncomfortable, because most of us don't like that kind of uncertainty, or that kind of like, well, what's around the corner? What if it's something ugly and big and eats my head off? Like it's always this unlearning. And I think you and I have talked about this at length, about when we stay in this space of alignment, of trusting that what is around the corner is always for us. It's not against us. And when we believe in that kind of benevolence, the uncomfortability gets a little bit easier it doesn't go away. You start to gradually get more comfortable with change, with it being different, without knowing all the answers. I don't have the crystal ball. Boy, I wish I did sometimes, but then other times I'm like, maybe it's good I don't know, because so much of this human experience is supposed to be about, well, let's just see what happens.
And it feels like fashion is such a mirror for everything that we're talking about, right? Like I'm just flashing to last night. I went out to dinner with a friend of mine, and we were both like, what are you going to wear? And we're both living in a new place. We were going to a new restaurant, and, we see this Facebook post that's telling us that this is like fine dining in the area that we're living. And we walk in and it's basically a Chinese restaurant, in terms of like, I'm making a very stereotypical statement, but even down to the chair, right? There's a certain padded chair that has a hole in the back. That's a metal, outline. Like there's a certain table top that is not, has no cloth or anything on it. Like it's what I think of when I go out to a Chinese restaurant. And it was just funny because there was this debate online about the fine dining. So we're both contemplating our wardrobe choices based on like, is this fine dining? Is this not fine dining? And then we go in and we're both like overdressed, in like jeans and, we're totally overdressed. But the point was, I was thinking about it. I'm like, you know what? It doesn't even matter that we're overdressed. We both feel really good with what we selected in our choice. And that was more what it was about. But having to, even in that, it was such a small example of what we do with everything in our lives, where we're making choices sometimes based on what society has said is so socially acceptable, how we need to, fit into the mold and want to show up in relationship with that. And we both ended up just making decisions. Like I was like, I'm wearing elastic because I want to eat. And, and she was wearing jeans for her own reasons, and it was both great, right? Like they were both the right decisions for each one of us and had nothing to do with in the end, it didn't even matter because we were overthinking all of what was going to be the scene. And we show up and it wasn't even what we thought it was going to be. The food was delicious, but it wasn't what we thought it was going to be. So anyway, I feel like this is such a mirror for what we do in every aspect of our life.
Yeah, I love what you just said too about your clothing choices. And I guess my question back to you was, what did that feel like to make those choices and then recognize when you walked in, maybe there was a contrary etiquette or acceptance? I don't know. I don't know if anybody looked at you weird, or I'm just curious about the social dynamic. But then what did it feel like for you to be like, I just put on what I really wanted to wear?
Yeah. You know what? I ultimately felt like I didn't end up really questioning. Like I walked in and I'm like, oh yeah, we're totally overdressed, but it didn't even matter because I felt good about what I was wearing. So everybody else, it didn't even matter to me, not even a little. Whereas I think in the past, or if I hadn't been so comfortable in what I was wearing or how I wanted to feel, I would have left my body, gone into my mind, and would have been all up in my head about, what that looked like. And you look around, it's like nobody else cares, right? No. About nobody's even looking at you. So it doesn't even matter. But I felt good. The elastic pants came in handy because it was definitely yummy food, but it all worked out the way it needed to.
Yeah, I love that too, because there's a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with this feeling about when you get dressed, you anticipate where you're going and sort of what's the vibe and what's socially acceptable, and is there some sort of dress code and wanting to fit in and belong and not necessarily stand out too much, right? This goes through everybody's head. So there's nothing wrong inherently with that process. It's just, I do think there becomes a point, and I really feel like when someone really embraces their authentic style, those thoughts get quieter about wherever you go and whatever the scenario is and the circumstance and, the dynamic of what you're about to go do. All of that begins to matter less. And you, as you just named, it was like, I didn't even notice. It was just fine because I got to show up in the way that I wanted to show up. So the most important part of the process was really sitting in your authenticity and just showing up the way you wanted to, and disregard whatever the norm is around you, the external norm. And I think for anybody that is a little sensitive to that or overly aware of kind of what externally is going on and having that be the thing that dictates your personal style, I've definitely had to work with a lot of clients to help them understand none of that really matters. What other people are experiencing of you in that regard, it's about how you want to show up. And are you doing what you want to do for you?
Yeah. And I feel like this is coming up for me in a big way because I tend to gravitate towards a beachy preppy is what I feel like the flowing, the linen, there's a preppiness to it, but also I don't know, I do like some of the fun patterns and prints and color. I love color, and I'm in a cowboy town. So this is highly, highly casual. And I'm looking at I'm going to the beach, but that, but I find myself really aware of how I'm dressing in relationship to how casual this is. And I do question, it's wow, do I have the right clothes? But ultimately it's well, this is what I like. So this is what I'm wearing, and love it or hate it, but this is how I'm showing up,
Yeah. And that takes courage to do it, right? And to make that choice to not necessarily acclimate to your surroundings. And I actually talk about this in my own podcast, where these sort of social norms around the pressure to belong or to kind of fit in or to reflect the environment or the community or the neighborhood you live in is dictating your personal style. It's like, well, wait a second. What if cowboy chic isn't my jam? So like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, am I just supposed to wear it because everybody else is wearing it? And it's like, well, that's a great question to start from. And I would argue that no, that it doesn't have to be that. And if you walk in a room and you stand out a little bit because you're wearing your preppy coastal bright poncho, I want you to feel great and sort of like, this is me, world. Hey, come check me out. Come meet me because this is me. And that's the best thing that you can do for yourself, is to show up as you are, because the people that are interacting with you or getting to know you or meeting you maybe for the first time, you don't want them to meet a version of you that's not true, right? You want them to meet a version of you that's like really you. So that's the choice to me always around personal style. And we don't always all get it right. Like, trust me, myself included, but it is a journey of continually allowing yourself to make those choices.
Yeah. And I feel like I need to be honest in that it's not that I don't feel the inner conflict between, right, like noticing what everybody else is wearing and then also judging myself against that norm and being like, wait a minute, right? So, but it does feel like such a microcosm of the macrocosm, because how we do one thing is how we do everything. And so I think fashion is such a safe way to really start looking at our belonging needs, our fears around rejection, our fears around showing up as our most authentic self. And, it's coming up in the simplest of ways. And if it's coming up in fashion sense, like, oh my gosh, where else is this showing up? Right. But it's also a great way to start leaning into embodying who you are in a really safe way as well. Right. Like, I mean, someone doesn't like my fashion choices. That's your problem, whatever. Right. But we don't always internalize it as like, whatever, that's going to roll off. I'm going to let that one roll right off. So I love it for that reason too.
Yeah. I thank you for that, because I think it's important that we all look, this isn't, like I said, this is an evolutionary process. It takes perhaps your whole lifetime. So if you don't feel like you've ever really been on track with your authentic style, there's no better day than to get started, and know that you can always begin again. You can always reconnect with that inner self and get to know who you are, and to have a little bit of curiosity and some exploration around what does that mean. And I think that's the joy of working with someone like me in that space. About there's no right or wrong answer here. It's really just about, let's just find what works for you so that you can live your life and do the things you want to do and go experience things and meet people and be in relationship and like all the stuff that makes it fun and hard at times. But that to me is the more important piece of this than the judgment, the social anxiety, like all the things that kind of come alongside wardrobe and choices. And will I show up wearing the right thing? Or, to me, there's such a bigger story going on there that I really do. I really enjoy helping people get clarity about that. And I will say, if you are somebody who are thinking about personal style or trying to figure out your personal style, have some patience with yourself, because it is not an overnight process. As I said, I'm not a fairy godmother. I don't wave a magic wand and poof, there it is. It takes a little time. So allow yourself the opportunity to explore that and make some different choices around that and see how it feels. Try it on, no pun intended, but like try it on and like live your life in that regard and see what it's like, and know that there's no mistakes. You can't make mistakes. It's always about just like, is there true intentional effort being put into this? That's all I ask of my clients. And sometimes we get it right the first time. Sometimes it takes us 2 or 3 times to get it right. That's the part of the process.
Yeah. And that's such a great segue into, if people want to work with you, if they want to learn more about how you might be able to help them, how can our listeners support you?
Well, that's a lovely question. Thank you for that. A couple things come to mind. The first is, I think if you'd really like to get to know more about me and my story and my kind of philosophy, I too have a podcast called Above and Beyond Style. I've done 3 seasons, and they're all sorts of different episodes that I really think unlock a lot of what it's like to work with me. So that is a really easy free resource that you can tap into. And then if you're interested in working in a more formal capacity, I'd encourage you to go to my website, which is mfdstyle.com, my initials, and follow me on Instagram. That's the other place that I am pretty active, and I share a lot of random things that I think are sometimes exciting and sometimes just helpful. But you can find me Marriott, MFD_style.
Thank you. And we will include all of that information in the show notes so people can find you easily and effortlessly. But this was such a fun conversation. And I'm so grateful that you were able to come on and share all of these nuggets of wisdom with everyone. And I am just so looking forward to hearing more about how the journey for you unfolds.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was great. I loved being a part of today's episode.
Thank you so much for listening to the Guided Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend or even leave me a review so we can ensure that it makes its way into the ears of listeners who need to hear these messages most. Until next time, may you remember how guided you truly are.